No one could have foreseen the horror that was about to unfold. What began as a routine missing persons case quickly escalated into something far more sinister. Beneath the rubble, a gruesome discovery revealed a chilling secret, hidden for months and leaving the police in shock. The police, who had previously been stumped, soon uncovered disturbing details. But the ultimate shock came when the identity of the killer was finally uncovered. In 1989, Shannon Medill was born in Alberta, Canada, the youngest of 4 siblings in the lively and close-knit Medill family. From a young age, Shannon displayed a bright personality, always seeking attention and enjoying the spotlight wherever she went. Her creativity blossomed early on as she developed a love for performing, especially through karaoke sessions, where she would sing into a microphone, captivating anyone who listened. Her enthusiasm for entertainment extended beyond singing, as she started staging her own little plays in preschool, captivating her family and friends with her imaginative performances. By the time she entered school, Shannon's talent for acting became evident. She shined in class, not just academically, but socially as well, where she naturally took on the role of the ringleader. Her vibrant personality and willingness to take charge made her popular among her peers, and she developed a reputation for being energetic and creative. Shannon's musical talent was equally impressive. By the time she approached graduation, she had mastered 15 different musical instruments, ranging from the trombone to the French horn, showcasing a rare combination of versatility and dedication. This kind of ambition extended to every area of her life. Shannon was known for being driven and goal-oriented, yet she maintained a charming, pleasant demeanor that made her well-liked by almost everyone she encountered. While she did have a tendency to be hot-tempered at times, her mood would quickly pass, leaving behind only her infectious energy and enthusiasm. After graduating high school, Shannon decided to pursue her passion for acting by attending university. Shannon spent her days attending audition after audition, and while she faced her fair share of rejection, this was far from a reflection of her abilities. In fact, like many talented performers, she understood that the road to success in acting could be long and grueling. Nevertheless, Shannon was undeterred, knowing that persistence was key in the face of obstacles. Over the years, she honed her craft, refining her skills and never losing sight of her goal. Her relentless pursuit of acting eventually began to bear fruit. Although traditional acting roles eluded her, Shannon found success and recognition in the stand-up comedy scene. Her sharp wit and natural ability to engage audiences brought her rising popularity, allowing her to connect with people in a different way. Her comedic performances became a new avenue through which she expressed her creative spirit, giving her a renewed sense of purpose. In 2010, Shannon turned 21, a significant milestone in her life. It was around this time that her life took another unexpected turn when she met Joshua Burgess during a night out with friends. Despite being different in many ways, Shannon and Joshua quickly formed a deep connection. Their differences, instead of creating distance, seemed to complement each other, drawing them closer. They enjoyed each other's company, bonding over shared interests such as watching TV shows and playing video games. Their relationship blossomed as they discovered new things together, building a strong foundation of love and mutual respect. After 4 years of dating, in May 2014, Shannon and Joshua surprised their friends and family by deciding to get married. True to her energetic and determined nature, Shannon dove headfirst into wedding preparations, and Joshua was right by her side, helping every step of the way. Those who knew Shannon could see how happy and radiant she was on that day, excited for the future she would build with Joshua. Following the wedding, Shannon continued to pursue her acting dreams with the same passion and dedication she had always shown. Living in Calgary with Joshua, she often traveled to Edmonton for auditions, sometimes spending hours on the road for a chance at the next big role. Despite the difficulty of balancing her personal life and career, Shannon remained optimistic, appearing in TV shows, voicing audiobooks, and performing in plays whenever possible. She deeply believed that the long-awaited breakthrough would eventually happen, and her determination to succeed grew every day. Then came November 26, 2014, a day that should have marked an exciting turning point in Shannon's career. She had just been invited to perform on stage at a Calgary theater after a successful audition. The opportunity represented a huge step forward for Shannon, who was eager to share her talents on a larger platform. She had plans to meet her older brother Brett at the theater that day, but despite the importance of the event, Shannon never arrived. At first, her absence was seen as a minor inconvenience. Maybe she was running late, or perhaps something had come up at the last minute. Brett's brother Shannon waited in the theater, but as time went on, his anxiety grew. Shannon, though occasionally spontaneous and free-spirited, would never forget such an important engagement. When Shannon still didn't show, Brett tried calling her, but there was no answer. Messages went unread, and phone calls were not returned. With mounting anxiety, Brett eventually left the theater and headed home, but his worries lingered. The following day, when Shannon still hadn't made contact, Brett's concern deepened. He reached out to their parents, hoping they had heard from her, but they were equally confused. Shannon's mother suggested that maybe her daughter's schedule had changed, especially if she was involved in a late-night shoot or had gotten caught up in work. As Shannon's family and friends started to piece together her last known whereabouts, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Shannon had always been ambitious, driven, and deeply committed to her career, but she had never been the type to simply disappear without telling anyone. Shannon had always been highly responsive, someone who would never ignore important calls, especially from her family. The idea that she might simply have chosen not to pick up the phone felt far-fetched. At first, no one wanted to think the worst. Maybe she had gone out with friends or had been caught up with a last-minute acting gig. Speculations floated among her loved ones, each trying to find a logical reason for her sudden and uncharacteristic silence. But as the hours passed into the next day, the reality began to settle in. Shannon still hadn't made contact. The cheerful, outgoing girl who was so close to her family had gone radio silent, and it made no sense. No texts, no calls, no updates on her social media accounts, where she was usually active. Shannon's absence became more alarming with each passing hour, and panic set in among her family and friends. They tried everything, calling her phone repeatedly, leaving messages in every messenger app she used, and even emailing her. But there was no response. Could she have been in an accident? Was she hurt somewhere? The unanswered questions hung heavy in the air, and they all dreaded the possibility that something far worse could have happened. Desperate for answers, Shannon's family contacted the police, but their initial pleas for help were met with indifference. Law enforcement officials were dismissive, suggesting that Shannon was an adult and had every right to disappear for a while if she chose to. The suggestion that she could simply be taking a break or intentionally avoiding contact was a painful blow to the family. Who knew this wasn't the case? Shannon would never willingly vanish without telling someone where she was going, especially not during such an important time in her career. Her family insisted that something was terribly wrong, and after much persistence, the police finally agreed to launch a search. The investigation began with standard protocol. Hospitals were contacted to see if anyone matching Shannon's description had been admitted, but no reports of accidents or injuries turned up. The first few days were agonizing. Her family and friends were stuck in limbo, waiting for any news that could shed light on her whereabouts. Yet there were no updates. Shannon's credit cards remained unused. Her car wasn't found at any repair shops, and no one had seen her in the usual places she frequented. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Her social media accounts, normally buzzing with posts about her acting gigs, upcoming auditions, and life updates, remained eerily silent, further fueling fears that something terrible had happened. A breakthrough of sorts came when Joshua, Shannon's husband, reported an odd discovery to the detectives. While searching their home, he found Shannon's cell phone in the pocket of one of her pants. This only deepened the mystery. Why would Shannon leave behind her phone, the very device that connected her to the world, including potential job offers, auditions, and most importantly, her family? Joshua also located her car, but none of these findings offered any immediate answers. Both items were handed over to the police, but investigators found nothing suspicious on the phone or in her vehicle to push the investigation forward. For nearly 2 weeks, there was no significant development in the case. Tension was mounting, and hope was slowly eroding when a chilling discovery gave everyone a jolt. Two strange photographs surfaced, attached to trees in a local Calgary park. The images depicted a young woman with her face obscured by her long, flowing hair, but her striking red locks bore a resemblance to Shannon's distinctive red hair. The photos had an ominous quality, sparking fears that they might be a cryptic message from a kidnapper or worse. The resemblance was enough to raise alarms, and the police took the photos seriously, unsure if they were dealing with a maniac or if the images were part of some twisted game. In response to this unsettling clue, the police, along with Shannon's family and volunteers, organized an extensive search of Big Creek Park, one of the largest parks in Canada. Search parties combed the area for 2 days, utilizing search dogs, drones, and even a rescue helicopter to scour the vast terrain from above. Yet despite their efforts, nothing of significance was found. The park yielded no evidence, no clues, and no sign of Shannon. After extensive investigation, the photos were traced back to a group of local art students. The eerie images were part of a misunderstood art project, not a taunt from a kidnapper as initially feared. When the students realized the commotion their project had caused, they promptly came forward to clear up the misunderstanding. The revelation that the photographs were a dead end was another devastating blow to Shannon's family. The brief spark of hope that maybe they were closing in on the truth was extinguished. Joshua, Shannon's parents, and her siblings were left to confront the grim possibility that she might never be found alive. The longer Shannon remained missing, the more they were forced to grapple with the terrifying thought of losing her forever. The kidnapping theory seemed less and less likely as time passed. There had been no ransom demands, no threats, and no communication from anyone claiming responsibility for her disappearance. Days turned into weeks, and the uncertainty became unbearable. Shannon's mother and father were living in a constant state of anxiety, unable to eat or sleep as the investigation seemed to stall. However, an unexpected revelation soon changed the tone of the investigation. Joshua, Shannon's husband, disclosed a piece of information to the police that had previously remained a secret even to her closest family. According to Joshua, several years before her disappearance, Shannon had called him one evening in a state of deep distress. After a series of devastating failures in her acting career, she confessed that she had been contemplating jumping off a bridge. This occurred following a particularly crushing casting rejection for a television series she had been desperate to land. Shannon had suffered a breakdown, her mental health teetering on the edge. Fortunately, Joshua had been able to talk her through it, and though the moment passed, the incident left a lasting shadow on her emotional state. She recovered, but Joshua's confession cast a new light on the current investigation. Could Shannon have reached a similar breaking point this time? This revelation prompted investigators to re-examine the possibility that Shannon might have carried out her earlier plan. There were several large bridges in the vicinity of Calgary, and the thought that Shannon could have decided to end her life in such a tragic way began to seem more plausible. The police, now working with this theory, initiated searches of the nearby rivers and bodies of water. Divers scoured the areas beneath the major bridges, while search teams patrolled the riverbanks, combing miles of terrain for any sign of Shannon. Despite these exhaustive efforts, nothing surfaced. No evidence, no belongings, no body. Shannon seemed to have vanished without a trace. Once again, the investigation hit a wall, leaving her family and investigators equally frustrated and heartbroken. By May of 2015, nearly 6 months had passed since Shannon's disappearance, and the case remained as much a mystery as it had been on day one. With no solid leads, no sightings, and no new evidence, the police began to quietly believe that Shannon was no longer alive. However, they were hesitant to share this conclusion with her family. The pain of uncertainty was already unbearable, and to confirm their worst fears without definitive proof would only further traumatize those who loved her. Nevertheless, the investigation needed to move forward, and providing answers to Shannon's family remained the top priority. It was at this point that Detective Christine White was assigned to the case. Christine was known for her meticulous approach and her keen ability to uncover hidden truths. Throughout her career, she had solved some of the most challenging cases, earning her a reputation as an investigator who never left a stone unturned. Her first instinct was to re-examine Shannon's immediate circle, starting with the person closest to her, Joshua. From the beginning, Joshua had appeared cooperative. He had allowed police to search the couple's home twice, answered every question willingly, and was present when Shannon's family filed the initial missing person report. He maintained close contact with Shannon's family, offering them comfort and reassurance during the agonizing months following her disappearance. Joshua's demeanor was pleasant and upbeat, leading most people, including Shannon's family, to believe that he could never harm his wife. They insisted that Joshua had been nothing but supportive and loving throughout their relationship. However, during interviews with Shannon's family, Detective Christine learned a curious detail that had not previously come to light. The couple, it turned out, had been in an open marriage for the entire duration of their 7-month union. This revelation was a surprise, as it had not been mentioned in the initial stages of the investigation. Joshua admitted that it was he who had suggested the arrangement, and although Shannon agreed to it, she was not particularly enthusiastic about the idea. According to Shannon's family, the open marriage was not a reflection of a lack of love between the two. Rather, it was something Shannon had agreed to as a way to accommodate Joshua's desires. She herself had shown little interest in pursuing other relationships, while Joshua had been actively engaging with other women. Joshua explained to Detective Christine that there had never been any significant conflict between him and Shannon regarding their open marriage. He claimed that Shannon had always been fully aware of his outside relationships and had even met a few of the women he had been involved with. To him, everything seemed consensual and without friction. Yet, Detective Christine couldn't help but feel that this new detail introduced a more complex dynamic into the investigation. An open marriage, no matter how mutually agreed upon, was still an unusual arrangement, and it could potentially have introduced tensions or jealousy that remained hidden beneath the surface. While Joshua's behavior didn't immediately raise red flags, Christine began to consider the possibility that someone from within the couple's extended circle, perhaps one of Joshua's other partners, could have played a role in Shannon's disappearance. Could jealousy have fueled a conflict that Shannon was unaware of? Or had Shannon been struggling with the emotional toll of her husband's extramarital relationships in ways she hadn't expressed? Moreover, this revelation also raised the unsettling prospect that Shannon's disappearance might not have been accidental. Detective Christine was increasingly inclined toward the theory that Shannon had been murdered, and the more she dug into Joshua's life, the more she began to suspect that someone close to the couple, if not Joshua himself, might hold the key to unraveling the mystery. Joshua's calm and cooperative demeanor, while seemingly above suspicion, now appeared more like a carefully constructed facade. The investigation into Shannon's disappearance has begun to reveal a much darker side to Joshua's life than anyone initially suspected. Through relentless questioning and evidence gathering, the detective discovered that Joshua had relationships with 7 different women after the wedding. One by one, these women were identified, located, and brought in for interviews at the police station. While most of them described their relationships with Joshua as brief and inconsequential, one of his more recent mistresses revealed significant information that cast new light on the events leading up to Shannon's disappearance. This woman, still involved with Joshua even after Shannon had vanished, told the detectives about tensions that had arisen in the couple's marriage before Shannon went missing. As it turned out, Shannon had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the open relationship Joshua had insisted upon. She had agreed to it initially, perhaps out of a desire to please her husband or to keep the marriage exciting, but over time it became clear that Shannon was not happy. She wanted to return to a traditional monogamous marriage. Her temper, which had flared up more frequently as the tensions mounted, had led her to confront Joshua about their relationship. Joshua at first had agreed to Shannon's wishes to end their open marriage, promising to stop seeing other women and work on their marital problems. But just a week later, Shannon made a shocking discovery that shattered any trust she still had in him. Joshua, in a moment of carelessness, had locked his phone, which was unusual for him, as they had previously been open with each other's devices. When Shannon asked for the password and went through his phone, she uncovered the truth. Joshua had not ended his extramarital affairs as promised. Instead, he was still seeing one of his mistresses and, even worse, had started discussing plans to divorce Shannon. In the messages, Joshua made it clear to his mistress that he had chosen her over Shannon, going so far as to refer to his wife as a secondary priority. For Shannon, this was the ultimate betrayal. It was as though her entire world had crumbled in an instant. Feeling hurt and deceived, Shannon made several life-changing decisions. One of those decisions was to leave Calgary and move to Edmonton, where she hoped to start fresh, far away from the emotional wreckage of her marriage. As the detective pieced together information from Joshua's mistress and other sources, the picture of what had most likely happened that fateful November evening was becoming clearer and clearer. Joshua's proposal of an open relationship had planted the seeds of distrust and jealousy in their marriage, emotions that only intensified as time went on. Shannon, increasingly suspicious of Joshua's late-night absences and the messages flooding his phone, began confronting him more aggressively. By November 27, 2014, the simmering tensions had reached a boiling point. Shannon had come home to find Joshua returning from yet another date, one he made no effort to hide. There was no more pretending, no more lies. Everything was out in the open, and Shannon's fury was uncontainable. A heated argument erupted, and the emotional explosion that followed was likely fatal. The detective was becoming more convinced that Joshua had murdered Shannon in the midst of this confrontation, and the clues only pointed more strongly in that direction. The investigation's timeline aligned eerily with this theory. Shannon's phone activity stopped abruptly on November 27, 2014, along with her bank transactions and social media posts. Her digital footprint went completely dark. However, a signal from her phone was picked up the next day, briefly detected in an alleyway within the city, a location far from where Joshua claimed she would be. Strangely, just a few days after her disappearance, Joshua claimed he had found Shannon's phone at home, in her clothing. Even more suspicious, he later claimed to have discovered her car nearby but could never provide a clear or consistent explanation as to how he had come across it. These discrepancies in Joshua's story raised red flags for the detective. It seemed like he was carefully orchestrating a false narrative, perhaps trying to cover his tracks. By early June of 2015, nearly 7 months after Shannon's disappearance, Detective Christine White decided it was time to escalate the investigation. She now had enough circumstantial evidence to suspect Joshua of being involved in Shannon's likely murder, though the case still lacked definitive proof. With growing suspicions, the detective filed a request to seize Joshua's phone and confiscate his car for forensic examination. Though the evidence wasn't airtight, she hoped the judge would see enough reason to grant the necessary search warrants. On June 2, 2015, Detective Christine, along with a team of officers, arrived at Joshua's home armed with the search warrants. They knocked on the door and waited. Joshua didn't answer immediately, raising Christine's suspicions even further. After a long, uneasy pause, Joshua finally called out from inside the house, saying he would be out shortly. The delay struck Christine as odd. She had the distinct sense that Joshua was stalling for time, likely trying to conceal something before letting the officers in. Joshua stood behind the door, his voice shaking as he told the officers he needed more time. Detective Christine White's patience was running thin. She knew that stalling often meant one thing: guilt. The more Joshua delayed, the more certain she became that something inside that house was crucial to the investigation. Whether it was evidence, a prepared alibi, or some sort of desperate last-minute escape plan, Christine was determined to see the case through. The officers outside were prepared for any potential threat. They had been trained to expect violence, possibly even armed resistance, as suspects cornered by overwhelming evidence often lashed out. But no one expected what happened next. Suddenly, a deep guttural sob broke the tense silence. Joshua's voice cracked, and through a flood of tears, he blurted out, "I killed Shannon." The emotional breakdown caught everyone off guard, but Christine quickly regained her composure. This was the confession she had been waiting for, the moment when the suspect's guilt finally overwhelmed him. "Open the door, Joshua," she instructed firmly but calmly. After a few more moments of hesitation, the officers kicked down the door, and what they saw was shocking. Joshua, covered in blood, had tried to end his own life. On the floor beside him lay an army knife, the blade glistening with fresh crimson. The deep gash across his neck was gruesome, but as the officers rushed in to secure the scene, it became clear that Joshua's attempt had been unsuccessful. He hadn't hit any major arteries, though the amount of blood loss was alarming. Paramedics were quickly summoned, and Joshua was rushed to the hospital. Though he had lost a significant amount of blood, his injuries were not life-threatening. He wouldn't need surgery, only bandages. His self-inflicted wound not deep enough to accomplish his intended goal. While doctors attended to Joshua, Christine couldn't shake the haunting scene from her mind. Joshua had just confessed to killing Shannon, but she needed more than his emotional outburst. She needed facts, details, evidence. The investigation had dragged on for 7 long months, and there was still a lot left unanswered. What exactly had driven Joshua to commit such a heinous act? And more importantly, where was Shannon's body? After being stabilized, Joshua was placed under police custody in the hospital. He was subjected to a psychiatric evaluation to determine if he was a danger to himself or others, but the initial findings indicated that he was mentally sound. This was not the product of a sudden psychotic break. Joshua was fully aware of what he had done. He had confessed, but the case wasn't closed yet. In the interrogation room the next day, Joshua was silent, refusing to cooperate any further. He mumbled that he would only talk if he could see Shannon again, saying that he would tell her how much he loved her. Christine wasn't buying his remorse. She had seen enough manipulative criminals try to dodge responsibility by playing the role of the heartbroken lover. She pressed on, determined to get the full story. Despite his initial silence, Joshua finally began to open up on the second day of questioning. His story was chilling. On the day Shannon disappeared, Joshua came home to find his wife sitting on the couch, visibly upset. Her voice was laced with fury as she accused him of cheating once again. "You think you're so perfect, Joshua?" she spat. "How could you humiliate us both like this?" Her rage was palpable. Every word was an arrow aimed at the heart of their broken marriage. Shannon was no longer holding back. Years of betrayal, frustration, and emotional exhaustion poured out of her like a tidal wave. Joshua tried to calm her down, but his attempts only made things worse. When he suggested that they could reconcile physically, Shannon snapped. She bit him in a fit of rage and screamed that she was repulsed by his touch, that he had destroyed everything they had once shared. Shannon's final blow, telling him that she regretted ever marrying him, pushed him over the edge. As her insults intensified, Joshua's patience, already worn thin by months of tension, finally snapped. In a blind rage, Joshua lunged at her, his hands wrapping around her throat. He squeezed tightly, her screams fading into choked gasps for air. When his hands grew too tired to continue, Joshua reached for a belt to finish the horrifying act. As he realized what he had done, panic set in. He tried to revive her, desperately hoping that he hadn't gone too far. But it was too late. Shannon was gone, her lifeless body slumped on the floor. There was no calling for help. No paramedics could undo what he had done. Joshua, now fully engulfed in his panic, devised a plan. The cold November ground was too hard to dig a grave, so he placed Shannon's body in a large plastic container, sealing her inside as if she were a possession to be hidden. He kept the makeshift coffin in the backyard, concealed under tarps and debris, waiting for the ground to thaw in the spring. When the ground finally softened, he dug a shallow grave, buried Shannon's body, and covered it with construction debris, hoping the makeshift burial would go unnoticed. Joshua wept as he recounted these horrific details. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from him after months of keeping the truth hidden. His tears flowed freely, but Christine wasn't swayed. His tears didn't bring Shannon back, nor did they excuse the months of lies and cover-ups. After his confession, Christine led a search team to Joshua's backyard, and with the help of sniffer dogs, they pinpointed the burial site. It didn't take long for the police to uncover the remains. Shannon's body, though partially preserved by the cold weather, had decomposed significantly. The medical examiner confirmed what Joshua had admitted. Shannon had been strangled to death. All this time, Shannon's body had been concealed in Joshua's house, right under the noses of investigators who had searched the property twice, but failed to inspect the storage containers on the back porch. These containers, hidden under piles of trash, had gone unnoticed. Joshua had carefully selected this hiding place, knowing it would likely escape the attention of authorities. Just 2 weeks before his arrest, he had finally buried Shannon's body in the backyard, in a grim attempt to keep her close, as he later confessed. In his twisted mind, he couldn't bear the thought of her being gone forever, even after death. Joshua Burgess was charged with second-degree murder. The news hit Shannon's family like a freight train. They had been living through a nightmare for months, clinging to hope that somehow Shannon might still be alive. Now, the brutal truth emerged. Not only had Shannon been murdered, but the person responsible had been in their midst all along, pretending to search for her, comforting them in their grief, and maintaining his facade of innocence. He had continued to act as though his wife was simply missing, playing the role of the concerned husband while her body was decaying just a few meters away from where he slept. 2 years after Shannon's death, the trial finally took place, drawing significant public attention. The courtroom was packed with journalists, eager to report every sordid detail of the case. During the trial, Joshua's interactions with prosecutors revealed many disturbing details about the murder and the tumultuous relationship that led up to it. Despite his initial claims of remorse, his behavior during the proceedings raised questions about whether he fully grasped the gravity of his actions or was simply trying to manipulate the situation. At the time of her disappearance, Shannon was deeply distressed and in the process of planning a move. Although she still lived with Joshua, their lives had become so fractured that they barely saw each other. They operated on completely different schedules. Shannon, still trying to revive her stand-up comedy career, worked mostly at night, while Joshua had a more conventional day job. This mismatch only added to the mounting tension between them. Their relationship had deteriorated to the point where arguments had become their primary mode of communication. Shannon was emotionally drained from the constant fighting and had begun confronting Joshua about his infidelity. In retrospect, Shannon had likely hoped that Joshua would come to his senses, that he would realize the damage their open relationship had caused and fight for their marriage. But instead of reconciliation, her accusations triggered more arguments, which slowly escalated into violent outbursts. Joshua, outwardly calm, was quietly seething with anger and frustration. His emotional restraint was merely a facade for the growing resentment and despair festering inside him. One evening, after another intense argument, Joshua snapped. Overcome by a lethal mix of rage and desperation, he strangled Shannon in a moment of blind fury. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who, despite his emotional claims, had methodically concealed his crime, hiding Shannon's body, lying to her family, and playing the role of a devastated husband in public. The prosecution argued that the murder had been premeditated, pointing out that Joshua had continued his charade for months, even joining the search for Shannon while her body decomposed nearby. Joshua's defense, on the other hand, sought to portray him as a man overwhelmed by love and remorse, someone who had lost control in a moment of passion. The defense also pointed to Joshua's suicide attempt as evidence of his regret. However, for Shannon's family, this argument felt hollow, especially in light of the fact that Joshua had hidden the body and continued his daily life, suggesting a cold and calculated effort to avoid responsibility for his actions. Because of his confession, there was no need to show the videotape of his testimony. Joshua was eventually sentenced to life in prison, but the judge left open the possibility of parole after 10 years. This sentence caused a storm of outrage from the victim's family. Joshua recently had the opportunity to apply for parole. The news may have sent a chill through Shannon's family.